Chief of Defense Staff recently has favored spending on cruise missile submarines rather than a third naval air carrier, which requires a fleet of 5 to 15 other ships for its protection in the event of a war. So, do you support his views on this thing? Also, what is your take on submarines as an alternative to aircraft carrier?
Well, it's like comparing, frankly speaking, apples and oranges. If you ask me in one word to say it very bluntly. And it's sad, if you look at it, it's tragic that even at the level of a chief of defense staff, there is such a poor understanding of the importance of the maritime domain and maritime security. And this is something that is really sad. Uh, Aircraft carriers and submarines are not a zero-sum game that if I have more submarines, I don't need aircraft carriers or vice versa. Submarines have a role to play. Cruise missile submarines have a role to play. Nuclear submarines have a role to play. And so do aircraft carriers have a role to play. If aircraft carriers were not important, let me just put it this way. If aircraft carriers were not important, why would the 5 largest navies in the world still be operating aircraft carriers and still be investing in building new aircraft carriers? If they are such expensive platforms. The Americans are building aircraft carriers. The Brits have just built 2 aircraft carriers. The Chinese are continuing with the aircraft carrier program. The French are building an aircraft carrier. The Russians, who never had aircraft carriers, are also now operating aircraft carriers. So there is obviously some merit to operating an aircraft carrier. I won't go into the merits, what my views are. I'm just laying out the sort of framework. Now, India has also had aircraft carriers for many, many years. But we've never had large aircraft carriers. We've had more or less what are called air defense carriers, not strike carriers, because they've been smaller. Vikrant, Virat were small carriers. Vikramaditya is somewhat a strike carrier. And if we do get Vishal or the IAC-2, which is being spoken about, 65,000 ton carrier, that will be a strike carrier. Now, India wants to be a member of the UN Security Council. That means it wants to play in the big league. When you want to play in the big league, you should have the power to play in the big league. The aircraft carrier gives you that power projection capability over the oceans to play in that big league. Now, whether we should have aircraft carriers or not aircraft carriers or submarines is not the Chief of Defense Staff's level of decision making. This is a call India has to take. Does the leadership of India want India to be a major player in the world, or be a bit player and say, okay, we are quite happy. We've got our Bay of Bengal, we've got our Arabian Sea. We'll keep this safe and we are happy. But if you want to be in the big league, if you want to be an Indian Ocean power, if you want to be a Indo-Pacific power, then you've got to have the kind of capability required to be an Indo-Pacific power. You should be able to project that power. The aircraft carrier is the only platform which projects that sort of power, and India needs it. And to say that because an aircraft carrier needs 5 or 15 ships around it is not a viable proposition is again shows a lack of understanding of the maritime domain and of how navies operate. That those 5 or 15 ships are not only protecting the carrier, they are the might of your navy. 3 ships, if you pick up a submarine 100 miles off, 3 ships can be detached from that and go and hunt the submarine down. If you find an enemy aircraft approaching, 3 ships can be detached and go and strike down that aircraft. So it's not that 5 ships are required just because the carrier is operating. 5 ships add far more power and punch to that carrier which is operating, besides protecting the carrier, of course. There's no doubt about that. But imagine the carrier, it can move almost 300 to 400 miles in a day. You have a floating air base with so much missile power, so much sea power on it, so much weaponry with the carrier battle group, which can move 400 miles in a day. Imagine the kind of things it can do. That is something that somehow seems to escape people's attention. And they say, oh, aircraft carrier is vulnerable in war. Everything is vulnerable in war. Tomorrow, if a Rafale gets shot down in war, that's also vulnerable. Get shot down, it gets shot down. That's what wars are about. So I think we need to understand the dimension in which aircraft carriers operate. And this statement by the CDS that I'd rather have submarine than have a carrier really reflects very poorly on his knowledge of the maritime domain. I'm sorry to be saying this bluntly, but that is a fact.